The world has cast a hard light on a problem women in India live with: violence and an awareness that they have to look over their shoulders when out alone. Some women in India have responded by banding together, forming female taxi services and female commando units. And joining us now for more on this, Kripa Sekhar. She is Executive Director of the South Asian Women's Center, and we welcome you here to TVO.
Thank you so much.
Can I just ask a bit about your background when you were growing up in India, and whether, as a young woman, you had to look over your shoulder all the time when you walked the streets?
Of course, I think I do that here too. I mean, even as an older woman, you know.
When you say here, do you mean in Canada or in India?
In Canada as well.
Okay.
So but in India, yes, for sure, I had to, you know, especially with young girls growing up. We were not allowed to really go out alone after dark. So 6 o'clock, 6:30 was time to come back home because it gets dark in India. And we had to go out in groups. And if there were events which happened to happen after those hours, then there was always a family escort, usually a male escort, escorting us back home.
Do you think it's better or worse today?
I think when I was growing up, things were more hidden. The issue of, you know, abuse was far less talked about. Today, it's far more out in the open, at least in urban India. And it has become, you know, at least women have banded together, like you said, come together. And there are many, many, many women's movements in India that are actually very strong, very powerful, and they're able to organize very quickly. And
to what extent do you think women banding together to solve this problem can solve this problem?
Well, I think in one sense, I mean, I commend the women for what they've done to try to take back the power to make sure that the children are safe in those taxi cabs. Right now, it's just a beginning, but it's a step forward. It's also empowering because this is a non-traditional job, you know. And in India, I don't believe there have been many women taxi drivers, period. So for women to take this bold step against the traditional labor force that women have been pushed into is really commendable. The second part of that is, though, you know, are these women going to be provided with the protection they need in order to ensure that they're able to carry out their job?
By whom? Protection by whom?
By the government, by, you know, law enforcement agencies, to make sure that they are safe. They themselves are safe, and the children that they carry are also safe. So I think it's commendable that they're able to also, you know, this is an economic empowerment kind of project. I think it will, if it spreads, it will remove the taboos around non-traditional work that women do. Although there have been women in places like Punjab and Haryana that have driven tractors in the fields, you know, it's not unusual. But taxi drivers, I think, is probably one of the first initiatives, and I think it's great.
I gather the police are helping to train some of the drivers, maybe giving them self-defense courses, that kind of thing?
I think that in and of itself is not enough, because especially if you know, happen to have a group of people, like we've seen in the gang rape cases,
yes.
Then it becomes problematic. I think while the training is one part of it, there needs to be additional supports to ensure that this is a measure that receives full government support, full support from law enforcement, as well as full support from the community, so that there is no backlash from the male taxi drivers.
If all of that support that you just talked about, political, community, law enforcement, if your dream world were 10 out of 10, where do you think India is right now in terms of providing that support?
That would be a very hard question to answer, actually. I think this is the first bold move. I think the second bold move is that the police have actually said they'd come forward to train. It is our hope that the police will also provide the support the women need. So where are they? I would say they're halfway there.
Halfway there, 5 out of 10.
Yeah.
I want to read you something that a researcher on gender and international relations at the University of Melbourne wrote, explaining why forming all-female commando units in India will not do the job of putting an end to gang rapes. Here's what she said. Such measures, whether domestic or international, are limited by a number of assumptions. The first is that sexual violence is an inevitable risk that women must, quote, manage. The second is that women are a, quote, peaceful panacea to men's natural violent tendencies. Both assumptions rely on essentialist ideas about gender that obscure the social, economic, and political determinants of such violence. The root of the problem is not the physical space of the city, however dark, nor is it, as suggested by Delhi's chief minister, sex and drug rackets, the presence of certain individual bad men. The violence against women in Delhi extends beyond rape. It is part of a wider cultural phenomenon that sees women subjugated daily. What do you think?
I actually agree with the last part particularly, and I'll tell you why. I think and let me go back to one piece. I think the issue of violence against women is not a cultural issue. I don't believe any culture really says, you know, you have to go out and do this to a woman or a girl child. But I think what has happened in India, it has manifested itself in a different way. It's become more evidenced. I think part of it is because people have started becoming more aware and have started taking action around it. But has that changed anything? I don't know, because we still hear about the rapes. We still hear about the tragedies that women are facing every day. And part of it is until attitudes change, I don't believe there will be real change. And I think that is something that even, I believe the Supreme Court of India has sort of indicated at one stage or the other that the attitudes of people have to change. And that includes the women who raise
the really? Okay.
Raise the male child.
I inferred from that that you meant the attitudes of men, but you mean beyond that.
Yes, I mean that in raising the male child. So is preferential treatment given to a man or a boy? How are women and girls viewed? And I have to say one thing, of course, women and girls in India, particularly in urban India, are moving forward. They are in better jobs. There are two-income families almost everywhere. You have to work. There have to be two-income families because, India has become so expensive, So,
but do mothers
mothers
enable this?
Enable it.
They do.
To a large degree, a male child is seen almost as a gift, and a female child is seen as someone who has to be the caregiver, the caretaker, etc. But I won't say this is across the board. I think there are many, 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 many women and men, for that many parents, who have begun to realize that in fact it is their daughters now who are taking care of them more than their sons.
Do you think
so that attitude may be changing, but very, very gently.
Do you think Indian culture is inherently misogynistic?
I think all cultures are misogynistic, if you ask me. I mean, you look at Canada. I mean, look at the job situation. In terms of the growth of women in jobs of positions of power. Look at our parliament, for example. How many women are there? How many women are represented in parliament?
Well, but is that because men hate women? Or are there other factors going on there?
Well, there could be other underlying factors. So what I'm trying to say is that I think the whole issue of power dynamics, male power, is something that is inherently dominant in almost every culture.
Not Iceland.
Okay.
Because we're not going to compare in Iceland, where women are half the parliament, and where the head of state or head of government is often a woman. It's not the same as India. You're not going to compare those two societies, I think.
Although India did have a female prime minister who was fairly strong.
Yes, she was.
And she was very dynamic. So I think Indian women, many of them have done great things to move women's agendas forward. Unfortunately, there are still a number of men, as in every community, that try to take that power. But I think the issue with India still remains the issue of the treatment of the male child.
Can you help us understand this? I can't remember the dates exactly, but I'm guessing that Indira Gandhi came along 20 or 25 years before Canada had its first female prime minister. And yet, I think all fair-minded observers would say India has a much larger problem than Canada when it comes to treatment of women, misogyny, all of those kinds of things. So why is that? You got your first head of government way before we did, and yet it's worse there.
And I think she took a lot of measures. Actually, she did a lot of work with women who were in poverty. She tried to help them by creating small loans for them to come out of poverty. She helped people who were in bonded labor to come out of bonded labor. She helped women set up their own little businesses by giving them loans.
But she didn't change the minds of very many men about the role of women in society.
And in fact, I think part of, and she herself faced a lot of opposition from the men within her own cabinet. So, but I don't want to get into the political stuff. I think that is a situation in every country. I think India has changed in the context of, jobs for women. Okay, there's more growth, there's more literacy programs for women, but I think the attitude of men remains the same.
I've got actually a quote here I want to read to you on that very thing. Just last week, the leader of the Nationalist Congress Party that governs the Western Indian state of Maharashtra and a member of a government panel for women said rapes take place also because of a woman's clothes, her behavior, and her being at inappropriate places. Now, this is something nobody in Canada would say out loud in many years. Here's somebody still saying it.
Really? Do you really say that? But look back in our history.
A lot of people might think it, but no one would say that out loud today.
No, there was actually a judge in Alberta, if you remember, who said, when a young woman went for a job interview, she was sexually attacked. And when the case went to court, he actually said, well, she provoked him because of the way she was dressed.
Yes, you're right.
So, yeah, you remember
There
that.
are exceptions, you're right.
So this is no different. So it happens everywhere. That's what I'm trying to say. And it happens at every level. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. No, I'm asking because I want to hear your answers.
But that's the truth. And I'm going to go back to my time in Saskatchewan when, I was involved with the Melfort trial of a young Aboriginal girl who was only 12 years old, who was attacked by 3 men who together weighed 500 pounds. And she was sexually assaulted. And they got away. They all got away. So what I'm trying to say is the attitudes haven't changed, that the blame again was on the Aboriginal community and not on these men.
So Canada
and not
should
about
not be
changing.
so proud.
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful when we're pointing fingers that we ourselves get our, our issues right, that we get our whole house in order. And I'm not saying that India is perfect. I think India has a long way to go, and particularly as it relates to, I go back to the attitudes of the male child, because the male child is seen as a gift. When a woman has as a boy in India, it's seen as a thing of pride. He's going to carry the family name, he's going to look after the family won't have to pay a dowry for him, but it's the other way around for a girl, right? That has slowly changed. But I don't know when the full change will come.
That's what I was going to say.
And we see that prevalent in Canada as well among the communities that we serve. It's still there. I'm sorry to say it still exists in our community.
But you've seen how far Indian society has come in the last 50 years, so how long do you think it will take before you get the kind of equality you're talking about?
What kind of moving forward? They moved forward in terms of trade, they moved forward in terms of, yes, some education and all, but they still haven't moved forward on issues related to the treatment of women.
Do you think, we've got about a minute and a half to go here, do you think that the South Asian community here in Canada has a special or particular responsibility to deal with this issue in a way that perhaps other communities do not?
I think the responsibility is on everybody. Yes, the South Asian community needs to come up with a clear response from their own community. I think the community needs to organize around a response, a clear response in terms of how are we going to deal with this issue and tackle it as a community. But I think the responsibility is also the larger communities. Every time you hear a woman's cry for help, I think people need to get involved and help that person.
And the anti-rape law that was passed last April in the Indian Parliament, do you think that will have an impact?
I don't think, I think there was an anti-dowry law passed some time ago, but there's still dowry happening. So I think the legislation in India is extremely good, and in some cases I would say exemplary, but then, you know, these things are still happening.
Kripa Sekhar, Executive Director, South Asian Women's Center. Really good of you to visit us at TVO tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. It was good.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.